Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and welcome everybody. We're going to get officially started here today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining Provisional Chapter 88's monthly luncheon. Today we got Faith Roland, SRWA from Contract Land Staff, as our guest speaker. She's going to be talking on Uniform Act, which I know is interest a lot of people, especially people that are in the oil and gas side looking for the other opportunities that the right-of-way industry has to offer. Sorry about that. When we send out our monthly invites and sign-ups, we're always asking what topics people want us to find speakers for. And this is why we contacted Faith, because we had to request to learn a little bit more about this side of the industry. Just to give everybody a heads up, also we'd like to thank Contract Land Staff for donating to the PITROW group, Provisional Chapter 88, along with Rick and Roy from Equitrans. They donated a little bit of money to the group, and along with Larry from MW Gary, Larry Edelstein. I'm sorry, I'm trying to flop between my screens here and capture everything. So we did have some donations, and that's good. We don't earn any money as far as chapter dues actually until 2022, until we're a chapter most likely. And that's all the at-large members designate and then pay that fee. So anybody can help, that's great. We're looking forward to it. We've got speakers coming up. We got speakers lined up until May. So we're looking for May speaker. And then in June, we are talking with Steve Carr and I have been talking together with doing a joint event with NALA. So hopefully we'll be back in person. It will not be the second Tuesday of the month due to IRWA's International Educational Conference, and then we'll probably bop that between that and AEPL's conference in Canada this year. So we're going to be doing something different in June. We also would like to remind everybody, coming up on the 16th, the IRWA is having a webinar. It's COVID-19 and its impact on infrastructure. So I can send that link out with the sign-in sheet for this. We do send out everybody's login information that they shared with me. I know Rick doesn't have his phone number shared, but if you don't want your phone number shared or a different email address, please drop me an email after this luncheon so I don't share something you don't want to share with the group. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Faith and let her start with her presentation. Thank you, Faith.
Hey, thanks, Johnny. I am really excited to be helping support PITROW and your activities. As Michelle said, you guys are really robustly reaching out in new formats and in different ways to try to engage folks in this time of a new technology and a new normal. I'm particularly excited to see some of my old friends, Gord and Dan. We have shared Ken Davis. We have shared a lot of time together supporting IRWA, and I'd like to call this paying it forward. You know, so many of our leaders do this because we really truly want to continue to grow the association, and more importantly, grow each individual member in your personal skills, your professional skills. And so I'm hoping today is just that for you. You know, the Uniform Act is something that's specifically in the United States. It was brought about in the 70s really as a way to treat people fairly when it comes to a federal or federally assisted project. And you know, if you think about it, it's what we do every day anyway. It's our mission is to really go out and to treat people consistently and fairly in how we help solve and deliver right-of-way projects. And I thought it was important, as Johnny mentioned, the nexus between folks that maybe have focused their life in the oil and gas sector of our business, or even in the utilities sector of our business that's more privately funded. to now switching over to thinking about publicly funded projects, I want to try to grab those skills that you already have, the things you're good at, and then help you maybe modify some of the ways that you did things in the past to make them fit a publicly funded project. Now, even our friends in Canada, we have specific ways that federal and federally funded or provincially funded projects are managed and are delivered. We have certain standards. And so I'm going to talk about those standards today and try to tie it together to what you already know and help you learn to modify some things to maybe be a little different. So I always like to ask a question. I know Johnny's got everybody muted. So I'm going to ask this, and if you know the answer, put a comment, and Johnny's going to moderate the comments for me. There are a whole lot of shalls, things that you shall do in the Uniform Act. And there are a whole lot of mays in the Uniform Act, things you may do. Now, first I'm going to give you my non-legal definition of shall and may. Shall means you have to, and may means you can, but you probably should anyway. That's what shall and may mean. So how many shalls do you think are in the Uniform Act? Anybody have a wild guess? Johnny, is anybody brave enough to guess? 0.
Somebody said 0.
No, it's not 0. Trust me. All right. Well, 37. Well, that's a fair guess. Anybody else hazard a guess?
We have 15 and we have 3.
3, 15, and 37. Well, you're a digit off, my friends. There are 223 shalls in the Uniform Act. 223 things that you shall do, or shall not do, as it were. How many mays do you think there are? If there are that many shalls, how many mays do you think there are? Things you can do, but you probably should.
500, Phil Corey
500.
says.
Well, you guys figured out that there's a lot more. Okay, well, here's the good news. There's one more may than there is shall. There's 223 shalls and 224 mays. And I actually paid somebody to count them, by the way. And the reason I bring that up is because there are a lot of things that we shall do, that we have to do when it comes to a project that has a federal nexus. Now, I don't know if any of you, when you've taken a right-of-way class recently, looked in the back, but in most of our IRWA classes, there is this federal a copy of the URA, copy of the Uniform Act. And I bring that up because all of the shalls, all of the things that you have to do are in there, and they're fairly easily laid out. There are things that work, that affect acquisitions. There are things in the Uniform Act that affect how we appraise land. And then there's also the relocation component. And kind of one of the rumors that gets dispelled early is that the Uniform Act's all about relocation. It really isn't. It's about how we acquire the land, how we value the land, and how we take care of a displaced person or business. So it has 3 components to it. That's one of the rumors that often gets dispelled when people start learning about the Uniform Act. So a couple of objectives that I set for us in this hour is really to dispel some of the rumors about the Uniform Act, how hard it is. It's not hard when it's laid out really clearly what you shall do and what you may do and what you shouldn't do. I'm going to highlight some of the key shalls, the ones that I know hang people up. And I want to connect the dots for you with what you already know about right-of-way and what you can apply to the Uniform Act and or to federal or federally nexus projects. So that's really the goals that I set out for this hour. It's going to go quickly. IRWA has a number of courses. There are days that you can spend learning about the Uniform Act, and we're going to try to condense it into an hour. So bear with me while we talk about the highlights and the things I think I want you to take away so that you're dying to learn more when we're done with this presentation. So first, let's talk about some of the rumors. And the first one, and I hear this from small agencies, from large agencies, from individuals, that following Uniform Act is hard. following federal guidelines is hard. But, guys, it's not hard, it's just rules. It's a set of rules and criteria that we have to apply to our work. And if you think about it, we've been doing that all along. Every course you take, every project you deliver has a set of guidelines, rules, and procedures associated with it. Usually associated with the money. Is it private money or public money? If it's public money, is it local money or federal dollars? One of the things to know about the URA is that it really isn't just federal dollars on a federal project. The Uniform Act is if it touches federal dollars. So any part of your project touching federal dollars, whether it's buying buses for a transit program, if it's pavement on the new road widening, if it's the wheels on the bus, if it's got a federal nexus to the project, then the entirety of the project, including the right-of-way portion, which is what we are focused on, has to follow federal guidelines. So it's not just, we're using local money on the acquisition piece, so I don't need to follow federal guidelines. That's in construction. Well, if you have federal nexus, federal dollars associated with any part of your project, then you do have to follow the URA. So I always like to remind folks of that because that gets people hung up right off the get-go. You'll have a small agency that says, oh no, we're using local dollars. We don't have to do this. We don't have to notice them correctly. We don't have to appraise property. We don't have to review property. That's one of the rumors that I want to dispel. You actually do need to follow the Uniform Act. And so following it isn't hard, but it is a requirement. I think that's the thing. One of the rumors that I've heard is that the URA changes all the time. Well, actually, it's interesting. It's the official title is Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act for Federal and Federally Assisted Programs as amended. That's got an as amended. Started in the 70s and has really not undergone major changes until 2005. And there was a fairly major procedural rewrite that mostly dealt with making the numbers bigger. Can you imagine from the 70s until the 2000s, the values of things have changed? What it cost to buy a house in the 70s versus now, what it costs to move somebody. So primarily those changes were to benefit displacees and benefit landowners when it come to making sure the numbers were correct. But the foundation, the basis of the Uniform Act really has not changed. When you acquire land, there's going to be specifics, and we'll talk about those. When you value land, there's going to be specifics. And when you displace somebody, there are specifics that have followed in the Uniform Act. So again, if you don't have federal dollars in the right-of-way phase, you don't need URA. That's just not true. And I want you to rather think about it in terms of it's not that hard to actually follow the URA on all projects. I think you're going to see this a lot more, especially as we have stimulus money coming out. That's one of the foundations of economic recovery for most governments. And I think that's going to be the same, it will be held true, come first of the year with the change of administration. We're going to see economic recovery dollars in the form of infrastructure dollars. And so that means federal dollars tied to projects. So what if you've done a project for your local city or county or municipality and you had local dollars, so you didn't follow the Uniform Act, and now all of a sudden these federal dollars are coming in and you want to tap some of those as an agency. Well, guess what? If your project didn't follow a Uniform Act, you're going to have to go back and redo some work. So think about it in terms of why not do the work to the right standard to start with and to a higher standard to allow your agency or your client to be able to capture some of those economic recovery dollars. So the Uniform Act takes on a different focus when you think about it in those terms. Why not go ahead and make the offer to the standards required in URA? Why not go ahead and offer relocation benefits to a displaced person as required in the URA, knowing that you can then go leverage and have a shovel-ready project, have a project that's got right-of-way ready, to go get some federal dollars. I think you're going to see more of that, and so I like to bring that up to folks because I want you to look for that in how you do your work. Say, why don't we go ahead and do it to this standard so that we can have the project available for federal dollars? Why don't we do it to this standard so we don't have to go back and do it again? You know, the old adage of take the time to do it right or make the time to do it twice. Okay, in right-of-way, we know that that's true regardless of your funding source, right? And so why not take the time to look at and see if your project can fit into a URA model as a way to then be ready for some of the federal dollars that are coming our way. So I like to throw that out because that's a very new thing that we have coming right down, you know, right around the corner. I think you're going to start seeing more federal dollars associated with infrastructure projects, and we need to be ready for that. One of the things I mentioned that is easy to do has to do with valuation. The way you value right-of-way to be acquired, our appraisers are very good at it. They do it every day. But there are two different standards that our appraisers use. And how many of you have had them? You don't have to say anything, but raise your hand. How many of you had appraisers say, hey, do I have to follow Yellow Book? I know what Yellow Book is. So I have the Yellow Book. Notice it has a yellow cover. That's why they call it the Yellow Book. Some things are not that hard in the URA, and that's one of them. The Yellow Book is a yellow book, and it's the standard of practice for appraisals following federal land acquisitions. Uniform appraisal standards for federal land acquisitions, i.e. the Yellow Book. So if an appraiser is giving you a scope for a project and they say, do I follow USPAP or do I follow Yellow Book? Now, why would you think that they would never follow USPAP? Well, for the most part, they're going to. But there are a couple of nuances required by the Yellow Book that are not in USPAP. USPAP is really the foundation in the standards, or QSPAP in Canada, but that Yellow Book requires a couple of different steps. Pictures of your comps, that may be a requirement. And more importantly, and this is one of the things that ties to the URA, both on the acquisition and appraisal side, you have to provide the landowner the opportunity to attend the appraisal. That's a have to, that's a shall in the Uniform Act. And so, you know, on other appraisals, you might just do a drive-by. But in the Uniform Act, if you're following federal guidelines, one of the shalls is that you have to allow that landowner to attend. They don't have to attend. They can say, no, thank you. It's vacant land. You go on out there. I'll call you if I need something. And then the appraiser writes that down in their appraisal and says, I provided Joe Smith the opportunity to attend the appraisal on September 5th. They declined to attend and said for me to go ahead and go do it by myself. Righted the Uniform Act. So see, that's an example of something that's not that hard to do, right? We're already meeting with landowners. We're already trying to develop that relationship. You know, even in these times, for the most part, we are all considered essential services. And so we are doing our work a little differently, but we are still doing site visits. We're still doing on-the-ground appraisals. And so that's one of the keys that when it comes to Uniform Act appraising that the Yellow Book's going to require. So how many of you have a Yellow Book on your shelf? You have a Yellow Book? Good. And, you know, really it is just a matter of knowing what those subtle differences are. One of the other differences that most appraisers will tell you is the definition of fair market value is different in USPAP than in the Yellow Book. It's not much different, but it's technically different. And so that appraiser is going to reference that definition of value as opposed to if he or she was just using USPAP. So again, one of the little things that's important to note, not that hard, and I want to dispel the rumor that it's hard to appraise under Uniform Act. It's really not. You just have to know that you're going to do it ahead of time. When it comes to URA, the other thing we all know, and we've got people from several states on this call, that every state interprets the URA slightly differently in that the reporting, how things are delivered, while their foundation is the Uniform Act, and the foundation is the requirements of Federal Highways, the lead agency for the Uniform Act. Every state's different. Now, fundamentally, it's because of eminent domain, expropriation. So condemnation is dictated by state law. The right to do it is in our federal law, but the states or the provinces are where the laws that actually implement condemnation are held. So each of those is slightly different. I know in my state, we are not what's called a quick take state. In other words, the landowner doesn't immediately give possession. Other states are quick take, or the possession is granted upon filing. See, that fundamental difference is there. Even though the Uniform Act doesn't care about either of those things, the part that they care about is when somebody gets paid and when you take possession. So when it comes to condemnation, the shall that goes with it is you shall not take possession until the landowner has received fair market just compensation. They have to have it available to them. And so that's a shall that, regardless of what the state law is about condemnation, that shall overrides and is the driver on how we implement taking possession of property, as an example. But every state does have a local agency guideline, or a lag manual, we call, and those are all approved by Federal Highways. So when it comes to knowing how to implement URA, it's the basis is the Uniform Act, but how each state does it might be a little different. So if you're working in 3 states, let's say you're working in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and maybe you go up into New York, although probably should just come back to do that. It's a little harder up there. And so if you're working in multiple states, you really do need to first know the foundation of Uniform Act and how it affects your project, and then look at the local agency guidelines that are very specific to how we communicate, how we take possession of land, how we value land. It becomes more granular at that state level. So I would also add that every federal agency interprets slightly different. So I made reference to Federal Highways being the lead agency of the 18 federal agencies under the Uniform Act. So they're the lead dog. They make the rules. But each then sub-federal agency has specifics that deal with their funding. A good example is Federal Transit Authority. So FTA, where a lot of our bus and transit dollars come from, has a different way that they review appraisals. And they have different limits on administrative decision making. That's not found in the Uniform Act. It's specific to their funding. So I want you to also then, once you say, yes, we have federal dollars, well, what flavor of federal dollars are they? Are they chocolate or vanilla? Are they FTA, Federal Highways, FEMA? Is it DOD, Department of Defense dollars, Army Corps dollars? So each federal agency may have a little bit of a layer. Now, I'm trying not to scare you off or have you glaze over at this point, because I'm not saying there aren't any rules. We've already pointed out that there are 223 shalls. So there are a few shalls that you have to get your head around. But once you get an understanding of the basics, and then you say, okay, on this project, I need to go double check what my requirements are for appraisal, because that is specific to federal transit or specific to the Army Corps. So I want you to always be asking, I think there was a movie back in the 70s about following the money, and we have to follow the money in order to follow the guidelines and the rules that go with, that have that federal nexus to the URA. There is a true statement in the Uniform Act, and specifically in relocation, but when it comes to the Uniform Act, when you ask a question, there is an answer that is universal across all platforms, and the answer is it depends. Every question to the Uniform Act, the answer is it depends. And I say that because It does depend on which agency is guiding the dollars. It depends on the unique circumstances of that landowner or that displacee. It really is very individualized. There is, for all of the shalls and all of the requirements, there's a lot of creativity that's available to us, more so than you would think. And so I like to always remind folks that it's a fact-based answer. You really do have to go in and dig in a little deeper and get the facts surrounding the acquisition or the relocation that you're doing, and that will lead to a more clear answer than it depends. And I did see you chuckle, Ryan, at that, because it truly is the answer. It depends. And while we're not going to talk about relocation today, because we have multiple courses on relocation, we have a lot of people that are very much a higher degree of expertise on relocation than I am, and there are people that love it, and I'm none of those things that I just said. So, relocation is a component of the URA. It takes a very unique individual to truly be passionate and love it and sleep with the manual under your pillow. And so I'm not going to cover the URA relocation components too much, other than to tie it to things like appraisal. I'll give you a good example. When you go out and appraise a business and they have fixtures and equipment in there, and we all know that some things are part of real estate and some things can be moved. And so when you're working on an appraisal as a federal nexus, one of your tasks is going to be to work with that appraiser and determine what's a fixture and what's personal property to be moved. So see how that's part of the acquisition and relocate and appraisal piece, but then it feeds your relocation component. So there are a lot of things that go through the URA that you need to do right up front. And so make sure that you're understanding that requirement to list out the things that are part of the real estate that are being paid for as the acquisition and the part of the things that are going to be moved. Because we all know if you're paying for something to stay with the property, you're not paying to move it. And so we have to make a list, and that's a requirement of the appraisal. That's a requirement of the Yellow Book, that the appraiser needs to list out the things that stay with the real estate. You don't want to pay for them twice, and you don't want to not pay to move them if they are to be moved. So good example. When it comes to some of the key shalls that I like to highlight for folks, one of my favorites is shall establish just compensation. Agency shall establish just compensation. So is the appraisal the just compensation? You can shake your head, it's okay. The appraiser and the reviewer recommend fair market value, don't they? Their opinion of fair market value. But the Uniform Act says the agency shall establish just compensation. So in other words, the appraiser can't establish it. The agent can't establish it. The agency who's getting the federal dollars and their representative is the only one that can establish just compensation. So that's a component that occasionally, as a consultant, we get asked to do, make the offer or do certain things. Well, why can't you sign this form? Well, because I'm not the agency. I'm a contractor for the agency, and you as the agency have the authority and the obligation to establish that just compensation. And so that's one of the shalls that people get hung up on. Typically, the review appraiser, and we have to have an appraisal and a review. So you have an appraiser who does their job very well. Well, why do we have to review it? Why do we have to look at what they've already done well? Why do I have to pay twice? Well, because that's part of the transparency that goes into the URA. That the agency looks at the appraisal, it's been reviewed for standards of practice in the Yellow Book, and the reviewer says, my recommendation is this. The agency then establishes it. So that's one of the shalls. When it comes to another shall, the agency shall make a written offer no less than the established just compensation. That's straight out of the Uniform Act. So they shall make a written offer. Does that mean I can call up Joe Smith and say, hey, Joe, I want to offer you $1,000 for your property? Not in writing. You actually have to have a written offer. That's a shall in the Uniform Act. And it cannot be less than the amount of just compensation. I do remember a long time ago and far away at an agency I worked for having a lot of arguments with my boss, who was the one signing the documents, saying, well, why are we offering them this much? Why don't we offer them less and negotiate? That's how the real world works, right? You know, you don't, when you go to buy a house, you don't tell people what you're going to pay. You offer a little less. You try to get a better deal. Well, the government can't get a better deal. That's the deal. We have to make the offer no less than the amount established as just compensation. Can we make it for more? Now, we can't gift public funds, but we can make it for, you know, there can be some additional things that we might be able to say, look, this is an impact that wasn't addressed in the appraisal. We're going to add some more money. We're going to round up. You know, we valued it, and the right-of-way acquisition area is valued at $100. Well, you can't get somebody to pay attention to you for $100. And so we're going to establish just compensation at $500 because that's our minimum offer. So see, I can say, yes, I can pay a little bit more for right-of-way. I can say, here's our minimum standard. But I want the folks to know that there is that distinction that says, first, the agency shall establish, and the agency shall make that written offer, and it's not less than the amount of just compensation. Now, as I alluded to earlier, one of the other shalls that I like to point out, the agency shall pay the landowner before taking possession. So if the landowner,
we've got somebody's mic on,
and everything looks good, and they sign the deed and they send it back to me, can I run down to the courthouse and record that document quick before I cut the check? No, we can't do that anymore. Well, we can't really run down to the courthouse anymore either and record things. There's a whole new process for that. But the bottom line is you have to have that money available. Well, it's going to take me 6 weeks to get a check because that's how long it takes my agency to get a check. Okay, you need to put that in your critical path. You need to plan for that. More importantly, you need to manage the landowner's expectations and get that check ordered. When I have the check, now I'm going to transmit that check. I'm going to mail it to the landowner, and then I can go record. Because recording, as we know, is taking possession of that property, isn't it? And so you do have to manage your agency a little bit, or your client, whichever it is, and let them know that, look, you cannot just go run down to the courthouse and record this document. We have to pay them first. It's a shall in the Uniform Act. Also, when it comes to litigation, should we have, condemnation be a part of our process here, then we have to make sure that that money is deposited into the court and it's available to them. Deposited into the court, and they have the ability to take that money out. That's a shall, because we can't take possession until they have access to that money, can we? So that's the other component of this that I want to make sure that you're following the shalls. They're not hard shalls, if you think about it. Shouldn't we pay somebody before we take their property? I would say the answer to that's probably yes. And so these shalls are not hard, and they're actually designed to treat everybody the same and treat everybody fairly. That's what we do, is treat people fairly. One of the other shalls that's important, because it ties to the acquisition and relocation pieces together, is that the agency shall not, this is a shall not displace a person or business without sufficient notice. So, in other words, we can't make them an offer, they accept the offer, and we say, okay, we're going to close and you have to be out in 2 weeks. That's not sufficient notice. There are very specific timelines associated with somebody giving up possession of the property when it comes to being displaced. And in the number that you need to remember always is that you cannot make somebody move out without a 90-day notice, and frankly, without a place to move. So you can go buy 100 houses in a subdivision for a new highway. You have to have 100 places for 100 people to move to. Now, they don't have to move to the place that you give them, but you have to have those things available to them before you can make them move. That's a shall in the Uniform Act that's a really important one. You cannot just say, hey, we've paid you for your property, get out. It just doesn't work that way, and that's not how the Uniform Act was designed to treat people fairly by giving them proper notices. And so no less than 90-day notice, and they have to have some place available. Same with businesses. You cannot give them less than a 90-day notice to vacate. And in particular with businesses, it can often take a lot more than 90 days. And so you need to look at the requirements of the URA to make sure that your project timelines, and again, these are all things we do on every project. What's our critical path to the end of the project? Your project timeline has to allow for that displacement and that move. We just completed a move this week of a car dealership and a body shop. You know, their maintenance and automotive center, and that move took about 18 months. And so from the time we acquired the real estate, we actually let them stay on premises and lease the property back to them for a period of time. And there are specifics in the Uniform Act that allow for that, as long as you don't charge them more than fair market rent. And it gave them sufficient time to reestablish themselves in another location. So Uniform Act is very different on residential housing and apartment dwellers than it is on businesses as far as timing goes. The notices are the same, but the amount of work that it takes to be compliant and get somebody properly moved does take longer. So if you're deciding that you're going to do a project that has displacements, residential, you've got some specific timelines that you want to address in your project. If it's business, you want to look at how hard is it to move that business. You have a paint booth. You know how hard it is to permit a paint booth these days. And so if you have an industry that is emitting a lot of things into the environment, much harder now. They may be grandfathered in where they were. They've got to be newly compliant in a new location. That's a part of the URA. While it doesn't say if you move a paint booth, here's what you do. It doesn't say that. It says you have to provide these things in reestablishing that business. They're very clearly laid out. So the shall is shall not displace a person or business without sufficient notice. The other one that is absolutely consistent with every one of our other lines of work, shall not coerce or threaten. Shall not coerce or threaten. We know in our line of work, our job is to be fair and balanced and nice to people and do what we can to lessen the impacts. We can't make the impact go away. We know that about our projects. But our job is to not threaten, not coerce, not accelerate condemnation. Don't ever want to hear a right-of-way agent say, well, we're just going to condemn your property if you don't agree. I don't ever want to hear us say that in any of our businesses, right? And so that's consistent with URA. It's how we're already hardwired, and it's truly one of the things that the Uniform Act was designed to do. So not threaten, not coerce, not accelerate condemnation, and in particular, not make a landowner sue us. We have to avoid litigation when at all possible, negotiate in good faith. All of these things are hardwired in all of our projects anyway. So if you think about it, it's actually pretty easy to just go into the Uniform Act because that's how we should be doing our business anyway. Not coerce, not condemn, not accelerate, not threaten, try to avoid litigation. Those are all shalls in the Uniform Act. I think it's important, and so I've covered, I don't know, 8 shalls. So there's another 200 and some that you still need to tack on, 220 plus that you still need to go find. But I do want you to at least understand that some of those skills that you have from your utilities work, your oil and gas work, your work as an agency person and now you're a consultant, your work as a consultant and now you're an agency, as we shift geographic areas and maybe disciplines within our lines of work, you can take all of the good skills that you developed over the years and apply them to federally assisted projects and meet the requirements of the URA. You really can do that. Treating landowners fairly and with respect, we already do that. Now I am going to use a little theater here. We have a new talent and a new skill that we're perfecting. It's like, how do you build trust when you look like a bank robber? How do you build trust when you look like a bank robber? That's a new thing that we've all had to develop in the last 6-8 months, right? We have to learn to continue to build trust and treat people fairly, but now we have to do it and not look threatening. And so that is a new skill that I haven't perfected yet, but I continually work with my teams to make sure that you're honest about that being a new thing that we have to work through. And so we already treat people fairly. We already treat them with respect. We all already try to avoid litigation. I don't know one project that says, yep, we're going to condemn every parcel. We don't need to negotiate. We don't do that. We actually say we're going to negotiate in good faith. We're going to try to reach agreement through settlement. That's already hardwired in the URA. It's already our goal to avoid litigation. When it comes to valuation, we already value properties. We already appraise them to a high standard. You may have to modify your scope a bit to meet the requirements of URA, but not much. And all the good appraisers, all the good reviewers, they already know the difference in the Yellow Book. You just have to make sure that you tell them, hey, I need to follow Yellow Book on this one. And when it comes to relocation, we know that we're going to hire really good, smart, talented, passionate people about relo to be on our teams to help deliver that component. You want a different set of folks doing relo than you do acquisitions typically, just because they're different skills and different tasks at different times. And then that way you've got people that focus on the negotiation and people coordinate with the relocation. So, I know that was about 45 minutes worth of sort of fire hose URA, fire hose Uniform Act integration, but I wanted to start touching on the things that you already know how to do well. You have a lot that you already know how to do well. To modify and start working on URA projects, you just have to be comfortable getting the Yellow Book out, getting the URA out, and reading and understanding some of those subtle differences. And figuring out the 223 shalls and making sure that you do those, because those are have-tos. So with that, Johnny, I thought I would kind of take a pause and let's see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here.
Great.
First one, does the Uniform Act cover loans with federal money such as Rural Utility Service loan under the USDA?
Loans with federal money under USDA. I would say the short answer with all things URA is yes in that regard. If there is a federal nexus to money, you want to ask the question. You want to go look at the grant. I always go look at the grant language, the granting language for the dollars, and that usually says very specifically that you follow federal guidelines, federal acquisition guidelines, or that here's how you report. We have a lot of state funding that, even though it's state, will reference federal standards. We have one called Surfboard, Salmon Federal Recovery Funds, something like that, Surfboard. It was state money federal nexus. And so I would say, yes, you want to look at your grant language or your loan documents and make sure that that's in there.
Okay, next question was, who pays to put back mailboxes that are typically in an easement?
Who pays to put back a mailbox? Well, let's talk about mailboxes. Is that a fixture? So typically, when you're moving mailboxes or fences or rhododendrons or dog houses, those are considered things that it's a cost to cure. So you may have to pull out a fence, build your project, you got to put a fence back. That's damages as opposed to real property. So for my appraisers in the room, did I explain that somewhat clearly? So the bottom line, but for the project. I always ask this when a client or an agency says, well, why do I have to pay for that? I says, but for that project, that mailbox isn't moving. But for the project, the fence is still standing. But for the project. And so that's true of most of our work, not just federal nexus work, but I would say that hadn't had the mailbox question before though.
Okay. Next one is, how do you handle relocating a halfway house or homeless?
Very carefully, and it's right up there with sexual offender housing. It's up there with, in my state, marijuana retail establishments, because guess what? It's not federal, it's state approved, but it's still illegal federally. Anything that is complicated, whether it's geographically or socially or environmentally, you have to allow a lot more time. There's going to be specific zoning where certain types of facilities are allowed or not near churches, not near daycare, things like that become part of it, your work in relocating. So you need to know that you have a challenging displacee, and even we've had registered sex offenders in residential houses that have to be moved as well, and there are similar challenges to that. On the marijuana, the feds have actually come out now with, because there's so many states that have approved retail marijuana, they've come out with some guidelines on that, but it took them a while because it was illegal, so you couldn't use federal dollars to move something that's illegal federally. Yeah, so it's a little more complicated.
Where can somebody get a copy of the Yellow Book? Is that something on Amazon or?
Published by the Appraisal Institute in cooperation with the Department of Justice. So I believe you can get one. You can get anything on Amazon. I'm not promoting Amazon necessarily, but if you go to the Appraisal Institute, I think you can also get a copy. Canadian Appraisal Institute may also have it if you've got folks that go. But Gord, does Canada have a Yellow Book similar?
No, we just use a QSPAP that doesn't exist in our country.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure, because I know there are some things that are slightly different because Canada doesn't have URA, and so the subtleties there aren't huge differences, but they're enough that you still want to grab that Yellow Book and take a look at it. Any other thoughts?
Here. Okay, got another question. If you have to relocate somebody, can you provide a rental as a place to go?
So if you have a homeowner that decides not to be a homeowner and they want to be a renter instead, that's
I'm
the nature
assuming
of the
that's what
question.
they're referring to.
Okay, yes. You can have a homeowner that decides not to buy right away. You can have a homeowner that decides they don't want to own a home anymore. Conversely, you can take a renter and apply their entire benefit to a down payment and turn them into a homeowner. So the Uniform Act lets you do a number of different and creative things that actually are to the advantage of the displaced person. So yes, both of those can apply. And they have 18 months to make a claim as well. So somebody may decide to build a house or live with their mom for 6 months, or any number of things because they're getting a new job and they don't want to buy yet. They have 18 months to make claim under the URA.
Got another one here. If a town is widening the street and there's a horse statue placed strategically, and that was paid by the city and landowner, what part of the city art project, and the road has federal funding? Does the horse need to stay, or is it on display, or does it? I can't. On my eyesight.
Well, here's the short answer.
Yeah.
It depends. That is the answer to that question, flat out. It depends. There are a number of things about a horse statue that I would need to know before I would figure out. But the bottom line is, but for your project, if your project is impacting a person or a business or a horse statue, you have to deal with it under the Uniform Act. Now, how it gets dealt with, is a different discussion. You probably also have to deal with it under environmental justice and NEPA and other things that go along with historic and cultural matters. So all of those things come into play. So the short answer is it depends.
Sounds like you need to get ahead of it quickly.
Yes. Yeah, I can't wait to see somebody send me a picture of that horse statue and I'll help you figure it out.
Let's see.
We actually had a few questions, Johnny. I'm
Yes.
pleased.
Yes. Not seeing any more out there unless I'm missing something here. Ryan mentioned he believed the yellow book is available online. Is that a searchable online or PDF, Ryan, or is it?
And it is called Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions. That's the official title. Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions.
Okay. We'll see if we can get the link and send that out. Try and ask for the link, and Mark
Sure.
Schmelzer might be he might be able to give us, he's an appraiser with us today, so he might be able to give us a little bit more information. And one more, and then this will be the last one. Where did that one go? There's an underground mushroom farm, and the DOT is putting in a highway through. Does the underground farm need to be acquired, or does it have to go where the access point is?
An underground mushroom farm?
That's what it says. I guess
depends.
you could have an old underground mine or something that you grow.
Well, but mushroom is chattel. It's a product, right? It's a harvestable product. So just like when you're appraising a wheat field and you've got a crop, you've got crops to deal with. Now, if there are, I'll give you an example. If there are lighting and special ventilating systems, I mean, we're not moving an underground cavern, but we may have to move the lights. We may have to move the ventilator. We may have to move the alarm system that's on there. We may have to move. So there are a lot of things that would be considered personal property that aren't part of the real property. If you bought a piece of dirt and it has a cave in it, the cave is real property. It's not personal property. You're not moving a cave, right? It's part of the real estate. It's part of the land. But if there are things in there that are to be removed as fixtures or equipment as part of that operation, that would be available to be moved under URA.
Okay.
A mushroom farm. You guys are getting as creative as I've ever seen when it comes to questions.
Well, it's like it's an Eastern PA thing in old abandoned mines.
It's a PA thing with old abandoned mines. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, hey, I could talk for another couple hours for those who know me well, and but I know that you're on your lunch break and it's time to get back to work. So with that, Johnny, feel free to give folks my email, and if they have any more specific questions, I am happy to answer them as well. And don't get mad if the answer is it depends, because that is one of the key answers. But again, I do thank you for the opportunity. It's always my pleasure to help support our chapters, and especially PITROW as you grow and build into a new chapter.
Well, we'd like to thank you for giving us your time this morning because it is very early for you right now. And I think I captured almost everybody on the conference except for maybe the people that you invited, Faith. So if they could drop me an email, I will get everybody the sign-in sheet here this evening. And we'll be getting the invite out for next month. We have our speaker is going to be talking about using their pollinating service. So they're talking about reclaiming land and using natural plants and pollinators to help occur the pollination of bees and stuff and make it as much as an environmentally reclaimed area as possible. So, and that's a company located just north of Pittsburgh and will be speaking with us. So we'll get everybody information. We continually like to thank everybody's support, especially the donations that came in this month. That really helps our group since we're in a hard place to make money right now. We're just being a provisional chapter. So we continue. We appreciate everybody's support. We appreciate you continually to invite other people to be part of our group, and we just don't want it a regional Pittsburgh thing. We wanted a national thing, so. We just thank everybody for their time today, and we'll see everybody next month. Thank you, Faith.
Faith, we'll give
Thank
you a
you,
virtual
Faith.
hug. How's that?
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
Be well. Bye now.
Great job, Faith. Proud of you.